I'm Helen.
I'm Miss Sinclair.
And I'm Edison. Y'all better grab your extra large popcorn. We are in the thick of things with great films.
I am open and positive.
I don't like it.
Let's throw on these boxing gloves.
Let's do it.
Let's fucking do it.
Welcome to Talk Movie to Me, a weekly podcast where we do a deep dive on a new release that's just hit theaters or streaming. I'm Helen.
I'm Miss Sinclair.
And I'm Edison. Let me paint the scene for you. Your name is Thelonious Ellison. People call you Monk. You are a black man, middle-aged, an author and a professor at a university in L.A. The novels you write are highbrow, thoughtful, nuanced, but they don't sell all that well. And your latest is struggling to even get to print, with your literary agent telling you that the publishers aren't interested because, to put it frankly, the book isn't quote-unquote black enough. Like Whitney Houston before you, when met with similar criticisms about her music, you are flummoxed, and more than a little perturbed by this not black enough accusation. I mean, what the hell are they even talking about? You are a writer, you're black, thus your book is a black book. But everywhere you look, on billboards and bookstores, on magazine covers and talk shows, you see the triumphant success of another author, Santara Golden, whose novel, We's Lives in the Ghetto, is topping the bestseller list despite, or perhaps because, it so fully seems to pander to black stereotypes. Frustrated, you write a new book under the pen name Stag R. Lee, entitled My Pathology, a story overflowing with every bad cliche of the black experience you can think of. Embittered and emboldened, and with a very large point to prove, you have your agent submit it to every publisher he knows. If they say they want a black book, you'll give it to them, and then see what they think. Turns out, what they think is that they have a bestseller on their hands and can't wait to make you an offer you can't refuse. What happens next can only be American fiction. The film, based on Percival Everett's novel Erasure, is written and directed by Cord Jefferson and stars Jeffrey Wright as Monk. Rounding out the cast are Tracee Ellis Ross and Sterling K. Brown as Monk's siblings, Leslie Uggams as his mother, and Erica Alexander as a new love interest. American fiction asks the question, in the often blurred line between fact and fiction, which are more dangerous, the lies we tell to others, the lies we tell ourselves, or the lies we've been told by society itself? First impression, Helen.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, I made it on time.
I was just going to ask, did you actually see the first 10 minutes of this movie?
I did, and it's because I went to varsity, okay? Way easier to get to, and I as an experiment, I was like, I'm going to see how long do I have of commercials and trailers? Exactly 15 minutes. Okay? So
Very good. Very good.
Now we know. This movie is under 2 hours, and I am just so happy about that. And within the first few minutes, we get a sense of how sort of fast-paced and economical this film is going to be when it comes to storytelling and time. It starts off like right away. It doesn't waste any time. And I really appreciate that. I'm excited to take in this movie that's been getting, really great reviews. And I'm just so grateful that I'm not going to be sitting in this theater for, longer than 2 hours, really.
Fair.
How about you, Sinclair? Your first impression?
Yeah, I found this really humorous right away. It doesn't take long to get into the humor. I loved seeing Jeffrey Wright. I have so much affinity for Jeffrey Wright. He's obviously had a really great career, but I do think that he's really underrated. And you usually see him in more supporting parts. So I just loved seeing him front and center in this one. You just like his character right away, even though he does seem a bit of a dick. He's enjoyable right away. And you can tell he's very frustrated. And he's also kind of a truth stick, which I appreciated as well. So I was just in. I was already having a good time watching this.
I love that. Yeah, I feel like that opening scene was already perfect. Like, we're in this classroom, Monk is giving a lecture about Flannery O'Connor's short story entitled The Artificial N-Word. And yeah, one of the students, this white girl, is so offended that they have to see that word printed on the chalkboard, and even seeing it there is violent and offensive. And Monk challenges her, but she insists, and then he finally loses it. He loses his cool, and it's like, listen, if I could get over it, I think you might be able to too, or something like that. and she leaves. And I just thought this was a really, really great opening scene because it's already giving us this tension.
Yeah.
In terms of his relationship to race, other people's relationship to race, ideas about what is offensive or to whom or who has the right to be offended. It's complex, chewy stuff. And the first 3 minutes of this film. And so I was like fully here for that. Yeah.
I also just want to say too, I think it's interesting that they're talking about Flannery O'Connor because she has a really good quote that says the truth doesn't change according to our ability to stomach it. So I think it was like a very appropriate author.
There's so much of
with.
that.
Yeah.
This whole film is full of those types of meta references, which I just so appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why don't we get right into storytelling?
Lots to cover. This is a very dense film in terms of the amount of storytelling that we have and the amount of themes that are covered. As you said, Edison, in your intro, this is based off of the novel Erasure by Percival Everett. And this story is so meta. We have, a man writing a book that is then going to get turned into a movie. And then spoiler alert, by the end, we're zooming out and seeing that the movie we've been watching is the movie that he's talking about. There's a lot of layers here.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of a lot to wrap your head around, but there's a lot to talk about when it comes to storytelling.
Yeah, it's interesting because this movie, the premise of this movie isn't necessarily new in terms of a new idea for a film. The idea of creating a bad piece of work to make a point, but it ends up being a hit. This has been done successfully before. This kind of reminded me of The Producers, where they need to put on a bad play and they make Springtime for Hitler and it becomes a big hit. South Park actually does an episode. They try to write the most offensive book of all time. They write a book called The Poop That Took a Pee. And it becomes a smash hit. And Morgan Freeman narrates it. And the people just love it, even though it's making them just throw up. They just keep reading it. This just works. This type of film, this idea, this structure, it works. It's a great starting point to have a social commentary. I do love the idea of we as human beings, how we can be drawn to garbage and this is what sells, and it's such a good social commentary. And I love that this film takes that idea but uses it to explore how Black people have been portrayed in pop culture. There have been Black filmmakers that have done this idea before. There's a couple films that have really, really inspired American fiction. There's a movie called Hollywood Shuffle from 1987. It's directed by Robert Townsend, which is about a Black actor who has to lean into these Black stereotypes in order to work as an actor in Hollywood. And the feeling of letting down his family by portraying Black people in such a stereotypical manner and feeling like it's doing the Black community a disservice, taking these parts, but also needing to work. There's also a really hard-hitting film called Bamboozled, Spike Lee's film, where there is a Black TV writer who creates the most racist show possible. He has the actors wearing blackface. He really is quite hard-hitting. And American fiction has teeth. It's not as hard-hitting as a Spike Lee, not as sharp as a Spike Lee film, but those two films were heavy influences on this film. I was a little bit worried because this did win People's Choice at TIFF. And some past winners, Green Book is a past winner, but also Belfast and The Fabelmans, which I find to be very digestible movies.
Right,
I was a little worried that people were liking this movie because it was digestible. But I was pleasantly surprised that this managed to be a really good watch, but also be really strong in its commentary and what it was saying, and unapologetic for that.
Yeah, I think that it's really cool that this is sort of a continuation of those influences, right? This is his first first directorial debut, which is pretty amazing. But this is a film that could only be made by a black filmmaker.
Of course.
It's so specific to that lens. Like, you just can't make it. A white person just couldn't make this movie. It is a good example of what happens when people get to tell their own stories who aren't traditionally given the opportunity to do so. And ends up being really thought-provoking and original in what it is. And like, when you think about the main character, Monk, that's his whole thing, right? He's over it. He's fed up with the way that black stories are being represented in the media. I wonder if Monk would even be a fan of Spike Lee. Probably sometimes not. It's an interesting thing, right?
Well, he even says at the beginning of the movie, when he's speaking on the phone, like, I don't even really believe in race. Like,
as he then literally tries to flag a taxi, and it picks up a white person standing nearby.
Yeah.
Well, and also, a lot of the films that inspired this, one was 1987, Bamboozled is 2000. It's kind of shocking that 2024, this commentary still holds up.
I know.
For sure. Well, and what the big theme of this film is the depiction of black people's experience in America and how it is modified to cater to white audiences.
Yes.
And you think about a movie like Green Book, and that's exactly what that was, right? That movie was saying it was about creating less racial inequity, when really it was just a way to make white people feel okay about racist history. And this movie's not doing that, right? This movie is saying that's a problem. And like, there's progress being made in certain areas, but then at the same time, it's not, right? Like you said, Sinclair, like, we're still kind of having the same conversation decade after decade.
But I like the way that this film is navigating that conversation and that dialogue, because it's from the perspective of Monk. He's this, like, he doesn't see himself represented in any of the black media that he's witnessing, right? He has a very specific experience and privilege of growing up in this family, and they're all doctors. It's a different lived experience. His name is Thelonious. He's named after a famous jazz player. You know what I mean? And he's exasperated by the fact that those are the only types of stories kind of being allowed, greenlit by the gatekeepers, which I guess are all basically white people. But it's a really interesting thing, because I suspect that Cord Jefferson, the film's writer and director, must feel very similarly to him.
He said that he was really drawn to this material because he feels like when he looks for material, he needs to see himself to some degree in that material.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
This movie asks really interesting questions about art in general, and why do we make art, and who are we making it for? And what I kind of took away from it is that those answers can change over time, and that's okay, and that one isn't necessarily inherently good or bad. When Monk has that conversation with Sintara when they're trying to decide on the winner of the literary award, they're butting heads over his book, Fuck, and her book, and he's saying, like, are they not the same? And he says at one point, there's so much more potential, right, in black people, and she says potential is what people see when what's in front of them isn't good enough. And I thought that was such an interesting perspective, an interesting thing to say, because there's lowbrow art, there's highbrow art. I think that there is good in so many different types of art, and it's made for different reasons, and it's made for different people, and I think that that's okay. And I think that that's something that Monk realizes, is that his perspective isn't necessarily the best or the only perspective, even though logically I think he thinks that he's right.
Oh, he totally does, for sure. And I think that's a cool arc of this character too. It's such a neat bit where he's learning from her about like, and from his brother in that one scene, kind of like, okay, wait a minute. We all know these intellectual, academic, snobby, pretentious artist types, and they are so resolute in the sort of righteousness of their lens. And it's funny to see it kind of not break, but be just like rocked a little bit.
Yeah.
I thought the writing in this was so good with how it communicated that, like the analogy of the labels, the red
that was
label,
so
blue label,
good.
black label. That was really great, and
That was such a strong metaphor. I was like, whoa,
it was
that
a
really
very
hit home.
strong metaphor. There's a place for all of these things, you know, but the movie is also saying, but at what cost? So if too many people choose the red label all the time, you know, we end up with 40 seasons of the Kardashians.
Right.
You know, so where do we draw the line, and what does it cost us to not want to see, you know, the potential, not wanting to have the highest quality of what we're consuming?
But I think also what the film is saying is that, like, Issa Rae's character, that stance about that line about potential, if what you're seeing in front of you isn't good enough, is only really legitimate if you have the ability to see all options in front of you. If you've got a whole shelf full of all of the different Johnny Walker labels that you want. But what Monk is saying is that I'm looking at that shelf and I'm only really seeing one Johnny Walker label. So that's not really an answer to that question. You know what I mean? And I felt like this was a real inner dialogue between the art, like between the creative behind this film, right?
I thought the debate between those two characters was so good, and I was actually waiting for it to happen. Like, I couldn't wait for it to happen because I knew it was, and I knew it was going to be written really well, because neither of them are really necessarily wrong. You know,
exactly.
She's saying, you know, I'm giving a platform to the voiceless. These are real people I based my book on.
Yeah.
You know, these are real voices. I did a lot of research for this, but at the same time, you can say, well, are you profiting off of somebody's trauma? Are you furthering these stereotypes? Then again, you know, Monk's work, it's enjoyed by few. I mean, it's not making an impact at all. So it's hard because people need to work sometimes as well.
Yeah.
Like he discovers that when he needs to help support his family, you know? So this idea of artists like selling out, and what is the cost of this, and what is this further? But at the same time, maybe you want your work seen and heard by the masses to make more of an impact. Like it's a tough debate.
Well, and I think to even say the fact that he was able to write that and it was so successful and he did make so much money off of it, that is a success. You were smart enough to know that you could write something that people would eat up because you're smart enough to know that that's what they want, even if it's not what you actually believe or think or respect.
And it's that exchange with Coraline, his new love interest too, when she says that she really loves that book before she knows that it's his.
Right.
And he's like, wait a minute, what? Like, she's a lawyer, she's a thinker, he respects the way that her mind works.
Yeah.
And it makes that really shatters his sort of thoughts about himself. Because he's like, I wrote this as a fucking send up, but it's like but also it's probably still good because he's a good writer in some ways, right? Like, it's gonna still have
also that judgment too. Like, it's such a moment of judgment where he's like disappointed in her for liking that.
But it's all projection. He's disappointed in himself for, like, part of him, you could see it in the scene when he was like, I also love the way that they kind of showed that scene in the room when he was writing and like the characters were coming to life in front of him there.
Yeah, I loved that. That was so well done.
It was really cool. But you could see in that moment, he was kind of getting juice from this too, personally. Yeah. He just doesn't want to admit it.
Well, it's interesting because Coraline says that when they first meet, that she's a fan of his. She read his book, and he was very flattered by that. And he was like, she read my book. She thought my book was good. But then when she says, fuck is good. It's like, well, okay, well, what is your standard of good?
Right.
So that attacks him in a way, because he's like, if she likes this, then she could like anything. And how do I take that first compliment from her seriously if she also
But
like
it also just goes to show how subjective art is, because even thinking about Iron Claw, like, you both liked that more than I did, and I'm sure that you know, personal experience plays into how we digest art and take in art, and if it's going to affect the way that we feel about it. Like, liking or disliking certain art is not, it's not black and white. Like, you can't say that makes you good or bad. And I think that this movie does such a good job of demonstrating that. And something else that I loved, and this goes back to Coraline, one of the things she says to Monk is, not being able to relate to people isn't a badge of honor. Because he does have this sort of like holier than thou, I'm up on my pedestal, I'm smarter than you, I know more than you, therefore you know, I take pride in that. And she's saying, no, like, that's not sure, the great that you're smart, but also like, you need to be able to see the world the way that other people see it too.
But I think that can be difficult for people who are like geniuses. And like, we have that one little scene with his mom where she's like, you know, you are a genius and whatever, and he's distant from his family. And I wanted to touch on that too with you all. Like, this film, basically, we've been talking a lot about the themes and around there's a lot to chew on in this film, but it's also like a movie, right? And like,
with
there's
a kind
this
of familial drama.
like, there's a whole sort of second like story here, which is all the family drama of this. Do you feel like that was necessary? Do you feel like it worked? Did it help kind of round out the character? Were you in for all of that? What were your thoughts on the family drama sort of half of this narrative?
I thought it was great.
Yeah, me too.
Because I think it really managed to just be a fully realized movie. And it offers so much to you as an audience. You know, it offers things to think about. It makes you question things, but it also has like universally relatable issues that we all deal with our family. We all deal with sickness. It manages to be a satire, a drama, a comedy. It's a romantic story in parts. And it's also meta in parts. And I think that it's just saying like, hey, Black stories are not one-dimensional stereotypes. Right. We experience all these things, and we should be seeing that on screen.
And I think it actually does an incredible job of balancing the drama and the comedy, because there's quite a few tragic things that happen in this movie, and this movie's really funny.
Yeah,
like, I was laughing out loud throughout so much of the movie, and it does it in a way that still feels true. Like, I didn't feel like it was, you know, forcing me to laugh or forcing me to be sad or anything. Like, the balance was really there. And then and it's also the movie's self-aware. Like, we get it at the end where Adam Brody's character says, like, no, this can't be a rom-com, right? Like, it's aware that it's trying to do these different genres.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, you know, what ending do you want? We can give you every ending. You know, what ending do you want to see here?
That ending was it's a big swing. It's a bold choice.
It is, yeah.
And it's also totally different from the rest of the film. It's like, it's a whole new situation coming in. I'm sure that probably has thrown some people off. Probably there's people watching this movie that did not like it.
Yeah.
What did you think?
It definitely becomes quite cerebral at the end.
I love that it's saying that, like, it is self-aware in the sense that, like, movies will tie things up in a bow for you, but life is not like that. And that's what it's saying, is like, there is no happy ending. The truth of the matter is that things just continue to happen after this particular story is over. And to wrap it up in a bow would be untruthful.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it's saying, is like, sure, I could go this way, I could go that way, I could go the other way, or you could just it just ends because that's the end of this particular story.
Well, and the very, very, very last shot, I think it does end on this slightly like almost cynical note. I took it as this like, okay, the final shot is Monk and his brother. They're on the studio lot, right? They get into the brother's obscenely gorgeous convertible, which I just coveted completely. He locks eyes with this actor who's, you know, sitting on the lot there, and they in costume, and it's very clearly a sort of a slave costume, and he's got these ear pods in, and
I know.
they kind of nod at each other like, hey, what's up?
Yeah.
And it's, you know, this really cool moment where there's no dialogue exchange, but it says so much. And I don't know, it's open again to interpretation on how you see this whole story. For me, it was a little bit like, this is Hollywood. You're on a Hollywood lot. It's all a game. Entertainment's a game. Play the game, make the money, get in your convertible. That's how you win. If you want to play that game is another question, but like, that's kind of what that was, right? Or it was a little bit like, this is what I got to do. I'm playing a slave, but I got my ear pods. So I don't know, like, it left me with that slight little bit like, and the game continues, which is a little cynical.
I think
and I was like,
that's the truth, right?
I think it's the truth for art too, in the sense that like most people have to sell out to a certain degree.
I did think to myself watching this movie, I would definitely sell out for like $4 million. Of course.
Are you kidding? Me too.
I just want a comfortable life. I don't care.
I want to say one. I just have one last little thing to say.
Okay.
That was, you know, we've talked about how meta the film is. There's all kinds of elements where it's really meta. But one thing that I just love, this little detail, that Monk chooses for his pen name is Stag R. Lee. And this is a nod to Stagger Lee, this larger-than-life folk icon who's been the subject of songs ranging from all the way back to Ma Rainey, through the jazz era with Duke Ellington, but also like James Brown, Bob Dylan, Tina Turner, Elton John, even Amy Winehouse.
Oh, wow.
Has sung Stagger Lee song. But I think the appeal using it for this particular thing is that this is exactly the type of like black folk icon that Thelonious would lampoon, because it's a character that's based on a pimp and a murderer who like shot and killed a guy in a saloon because that guy grabbed his Stetson hat off of his head. But yet somehow over the years Stagger Lee has become this outlaw of legend, but it's just mythology, and Thelonious would know that and take joy in using this pseudonym for the book, knowing full well that like none of the white publishers would clock it, right? Yeah. So it's just so good. Okay, so why don't we jump into performances?
I think that Jeffrey Wright is really exceptional in this movie and really funny. Like the comedic acting in this movie was super strong, and like I said in storytelling, like so well balanced with the dramatic moments. But yeah, I do think that he is really exceptional in this movie.
Yeah, he has a really great combination of dry humor, snobbery, and charm.
Yeah, because this could be an easily like unlikable character, and he's not.
It could also be a character that could be really aloof and distant, just by the nature of who they are and what they do and the distance that they keep actively from everybody. But yeah, he has a certain warmth that he can play, but he also is just so able to be cool and distant too. Like it's this unique introverted energy. And I know he's an INFJ, but he is so like he's fantastic in this. I really love his voice. He's got such a distinctive voice, and he never really like escalates, in the performance, and yet it still is all there. I thought it was fantastic. We know the Oscar nominations came out. He's nominated for Best Actor. Not surprised by that at all. Very happy that he's got the nomination.
Tracy Ellis Ross, who I just love. When she came on screen, I was like, this is great, and I thought she was going to be in the whole thing.
I know. I know. Like, I was quite sad with that.
And I think that making her the sister and having us lose her
I hated that.
You really do feel the devastation of the family, because you're like, oh man, I wanted to watch her for this whole movie.
Me too.
You really do feel the loss.
And it's a great character.
Yeah.
It's a
Really
like,
great
and you're like,
character.
how are they going to continue to navigate this and, you know, like work this out? That those particular dynamics, like the navigating of elderly family care between siblings is something I'm extremely familiar with over the past few years. And it's a stressful, challenging, difficult dynamic. And I was like, okay, well, let me see myself in this film in this way. Yeah, she's always like, she's just great. She's just like a beam of light.
How did you feel about Sterling K. Brown? Because the news of his Oscar nomination has just come out today, the day that we're talking about this film.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'll be completely honest that I'm baffled and confused by that nomination. I was very much hoping for Charles Melton for that.
Yeah.
I don't get what's like. Sure, he was fine. He's like very hot, but I also
There's a shot of
was
his
like,
butt, Edison, where
I
I
know.
was like, as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, Edison is just going to be all
Dying.
over this.
Yeah, he's completely gorgeous.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know, just giving us that character in general, I was like, okay.
That character
like you're
felt-
just giving me a gay stereotype. Like
That character felt like it should have been on Sex and the City.
Yeah, it felt like the
100%.
weaker of the
totally.
characters,
I
for
didn't
sure.
see, there was nothing. It's like the gay guy who cheats on his wife and with a guy, and then suddenly he's like, oh, now I'm gay, I guess I'm gonna have a bunch of twinks around me and do a bunch of drugs by the pool. Like, it's so lame. So I don't understand why that is a Oscar nominated performance at all.
Like
Like,
he's
he
a
was
good actor,
fine.
but the character does not shine through him.
No, I don't get it. I will say I loved my Lucretia Taylor as Lorraine.
Oh yeah.
She brought such a warmth and just like so natural, just such a natural way with that character.
I also just loved that side story of Lorraine and Maynard getting married. I thought that was really sweet.
So sweet.
Like,
I love
it
that
warmed
too.
my heart.
And I believed it.
Me too.
Like, yeah.
The publishers, the actors that played the publishers were so good. They were
good.
so funny and they were so spot on.
Yeah.
Adam Brody killed me.
Adam Brody was incredible.
So good.
He
I
killed
died.
me. But he's also making Plantation Annihilation
I can't.
starring
I
Ryan
can't.
Reynolds. And I've complained
It's
about
just so
Ryan
much.
Reynolds for a bit now, where I'm like,
Yeah.
Ryan Reynolds, he is just making that red label shit. He doesn't care. He does not care.
I don't agree with that. I think he does. He just doesn't care about the same things you care about. If looks great.
Anyway, Plantation Annihilation reminded me of Antebellum. And I was like,
I was just about
you know,
to say
that's
that.
Exactly.
this isn't even an exaggeration. Like, this is Antebellum.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's literally totally. It's lambasting that particular film. I
yeah.
bet you they're literally reading that film
Yeah.
for film.
it
Erica
was so bad.
Alexander
Yes.
and Jeffrey Wright as a couple, sexy couple. Loved
Very
them
sexy.
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Good adult mature chemistry.
Yeah, totally.
Did we have any technical things that kind of stood out for you in this one? For me, this was, in terms of sort of technical elements, this film was very like a Netflix film or a Prime Video film. Like, it was very basic for me that way.
Yeah.
There weren't really any shots that were astounding, or like the score was whatever. I will say my one thing though, I loved their beach house, and actually
The
like
set,
I
yeah.
sketched on a sheet of paper. I was like, I love the way that they've laid out that front room with the little seating area around. I was like, oh, that inspired me, but that's about it.
I think
Yeah.
that the cinematography worked really, really well with the humor. Some of the shots in this were fucking hilarious, and and it just worked so well with the comedy. Like, there's the one shot when he's watching, when Monk is watching Issa Rae read her book, and she finishes reading this book, and you can just see the disdain in his eyes, and a white lady stands up and blocks him and starts clapping, and I thought, that's a fucking genius shot.
Yeah.
Okay,
So it was
that's
moments
fine.
like that where I was like, wow, that's good. That's really good.
Yeah, I think that maybe technical doesn't stand out so much, and in a good way, meaning it didn't take away from how dense the story is, because there's just so much storytelling going on here. We don't need to be distracted by crazy cinematography.
The bells and whistles.
No, it's not about that.
All right. Okay. Well, what's the last word on American Fiction, Miss Sinclair?
I thought this was just a really solid film. It's really good. I don't always trust the People's Choice winners at TIFF because it's the people picking it, which I never trust. But
Fair.
I just thought this was such a great watch. It just has a little bit of everything. It has something to say. Just a solid film. Really, really enjoyed it. Edison?
Yeah, I also really like this film. I took literally a half vacation day last week at work because I really wanted to see The Boy and the Heron before it left theaters. And then I did a double feature and saw this after and by myself. And it was an afternoon. And I was just sitting there in the theater, just like laughing out loud and having such a good time watching this. I love that this film made me enjoy the experience of watching it. And also gave me so much to think about and chew on. Yeah. I really appreciated it. I thought it was, a really great film for sure. How about you, Helen?
Yeah, I thought this movie was really good. It was a great blend of drama and comedy. It was super thought-provoking. It was under 2 hours. And I'm truly looking forward to watching this movie again. I know that we say that often about movies, but this is in particular, I really actually can't wait to watch this movie again.
Nice.
All right. Well, this has been another episode of Talk Movie to Me. If you would like to get in touch with us, our email is talkmovietome@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at talkmovietome. Rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And all of season 7 episodes are on YouTube. And it's youtube.com/talkmovietome podcast. I'm Helen.
I'm Miss Sinclair.
And I'm Edison. See you next week.